My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I'm 25 years old. I never imagined that a wedding invitation could feel like a weapon, but here I am, staring at the elegant cardstock that arrived this morning. Tyler Martinez and Sarah Thompson request your presence. It reads in flowing script. My brother's wedding invitation. The same brother who called me an ugly, disabled fool 12 years ago while my parents nodded in agreement. The same family who threw me out like garbage and changed the locks. Now they want me there to witness his happiness. But they have no idea what I've become, what I've built, or what I'm planning to do. This isn't just about attending a wedding, this is about justice. Before we dive into this story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories. You won't believe what happens when the family that destroyed me realizes exactly who I've become. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. 12 years ago, when I was 13, my life changed forever in ways I never could have predicted. It wasn't just the house fire that left scars across the left side of my face and gave me a slight limp from the burns on my leg. It was what happened after that truly broke me. You see, I got those scars saving 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez from our neighbor's burning apartment. I was being called a hero by everyone in our community, but my family saw it differently. Before the accident, I was the golden child. Straight-A student, talented artist whose paintings covered our refrigerator, the daughter who made my parents James and Linda Martinez beam with pride at parent-teacher conferences. I had been accepted to an advanced art program, had won state competitions for my sketches, and colleges were already sending recruitment letters even though I was only in 8th grade. My younger brother Tyler, then 11, had always struggled academically and socially. He was the kid who got into fights, who couldn't sit still in class, who made our parents worry constantly about his future. But after I came home from 3 months in the hospital, something fundamental shifted in our family dynamic. Tyler's jealousy over the attention I received during my recovery began to fester into something much darker. While I was learning to walk again, going to physical therapy, and trying to adjust to how people stared at my scars, Tyler was building resentment. He started making comments about how much my medical bills were costing the family. He'd whispered just loud enough for me to hear that we couldn't afford things anymore because of my selfishness in running into that fire. The first major betrayal came 6 months after the accident. I had been working for weeks on rebuilding my college art portfolio, staying up late despite my fatigue to create pieces that would showcase my talent. The deadline for the prestigious Whitmore Academy summer program was approaching, and this was my chance to prove that my artistic abilities hadn't been diminished by what I'd been through. I had created 12 stunning pieces, my best work ever, born from the pain and resilience I discovered within myself. The morning I planned to submit my portfolio, I found it destroyed. Every single painting and sketch had been torn to pieces, scattered across my bedroom floor like confetti. Tyler stood in my doorway, his face a mask of manufactured concern, telling my parents that I had destroyed it myself in a fit of rage about my appearance. He claimed I had screamed about how no one would ever accept ugly work from an ugly person. My parents, already overwhelmed by medical bills and the stress of my recovery, believed him without question. When I tried to defend myself, sobbing as I gathered the remnants of months of work, Tyler's response was calculated and cruel. He told my parents that I was becoming unstable, that the trauma had affected my mind as much as my body. He suggested that I was making up stories and destroying my own work for attention. My mother Linda looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion that I'll never forget. My father James simply walked away, muttering about how they couldn't handle another crisis. From that moment forward, my parents began comparing everything I did to Tyler's achievements. When I brought home an A+ on a difficult math test, they'd mention Tyler's improvement in behavior at school. When I won a local essay contest, despite my emotional turmoil, they'd praise Tyler for finally making a friend. It was as if they had decided that my accident had somehow shifted the family balance, and Tyler deserved to be the center of their world now. My attempts to regain their approval became increasingly desperate. I threw myself into academics with an intensity that worried my teachers, studying until 2 and 3 in the morning to maintain perfect grades. I volunteered at the hospital where I'd been treated, hoping my parents would see that I was giving back to the community. I even started doing Tyler's chores in addition to my own, thinking that if I could just prove how helpful and worthy I was, they'd remember the daughter they used to love. But Tyler had already poisoned that well. Every kindness I showed was reframed as manipulation. Every achievement was dismissed as me trying to steal attention from Tyler's progress. The isolation within my own home became suffocating. I was living with people who had once cherished me, but who now looked at me as if I were a burden they were forced to bear. As I entered high school, Tyler's campaign against me became more sophisticated and devastating. He had learned to weaponize information, to manipulate social situations, and to present himself as the concerned brother trying to help his troubled sister. What I didn't realize at the time was that Tyler was documenting everything, building a case against my mental stability that would serve his purposes for years to come. The first major escalation came when Tyler began spreading carefully crafted rumors at school. He would approach my classmates with expressions of worried concern, explaining that I had been acting strangely at home since the accident. He told them I talked to myself, that I had violent outbursts, that our parents were considering having me institutionalized. These weren't wild accusations that people could easily dismiss. Tyler was smart enough to mix truth with fiction, using my real struggles with post-traumatic stress and adjustment to create a narrative of instability. The psychological torture reached new heights when I discovered Tyler had been recording my private therapy sessions. Dr. Elizabeth Warren had been helping me process the trauma of the fire and my family's rejection, and our sessions were supposed to be my safe space. But Tyler had planted a small recording device in my backpack, capturing hours of me talking about my fears, my family problems, and my struggles with self-image. He edited these recordings to remove context, creating clips that made me sound paranoid and delusional. He shared these edited recordings with classmates, including my best friend Sarah Thompson. Sarah had been my closest companion since elementary school, the person who had visited me every day in the hospital, who had promised that my scars didn't matter and that we'd always be sisters in spirit. But when she heard those manipulated recordings, combined with Tyler's concerned brother act, she began to pull away from me. The second major betrayal was Sarah's complete abandonment. She didn't just stop being my friend, she actively turned against me. At Tyler's suggestion, she began spreading the story that I had become obsessed with her, that I was following her and making her uncomfortable. She told people I had been sending her threatening messages, though I had never sent anything but confused, hurt texts asking why she was avoiding me. Sarah's betrayal was particularly devastating because she had been my lifeline, the person who made me feel normal despite everything I'd been through. My parents not only failed to protect me from Tyler's psychological warfare, they became active participants. When I begged them to listen to my side of the story about the recordings, they accused me of being paranoid and attention-seeking. Linda, my own mother, told me that I needed to accept responsibility for my mental health issues instead of blaming Tyler for everything. They canceled my therapy sessions with Dr. Warren, claiming I was using them to create dramatic stories rather than actually healing. Tyler's cruelty became increasingly creative and targeted. He would hide my pain medication, knowing that I still struggled with chronic pain from my injuries, then express concern to our parents about my drug-seeking behavior when I frantically searched for the missing pills. He sabotaged my school presentations by deleting files from my computer or hiding essential materials. He even went so far as to create fake social media accounts to send me cruel messages about my appearance, then show our parents the messages as evidence of how other people really saw me. My first real attempt at fighting back came during my junior year. Tyler had been accepted into the National Honor Society based largely on a community service project that I later discovered was entirely plagiarized from online sources. During the induction ceremony, with our parents beaming with pride in the audience, I stood up and publicly accused him of fraud. I had printed copies of the original sources, had documented proof of his plagiarism, and I was determined to expose the truth. The result was catastrophic. Tyler broke down in tears, claiming I was so jealous of his success that I was willing to destroy his reputation with false accusations. My parents were mortified, not by Tyler's cheating, but by my public outburst. They dragged me home and grounded me for 3 months, taking away all my privileges and treating me like a criminal. Tyler, meanwhile, was allowed to keep his honor society membership because the adults involved decided that family disputes weren't grounds for investigation. The punishment for that rebellion was severe. My parents made it clear that any further attempts to undermine Tyler would result in serious consequences. They threatened to send me to a residential facility for troubled teens, claiming that my jealousy and vindictiveness were becoming dangerous. I was forbidden from attending school events, from participating in extracurricular activities, from having any social contact outside of classroom time. It was during this period of intense isolation that I met Mrs. Jennifer Chin, my art teacher, who became my first real ally. Mrs. Chin had noticed that my artistic work was becoming darker and more emotionally complex, and she began staying after school to work with me privately. She never asked directly about my family situation, but she provided a space where I could express myself honestly through my art. She also began quietly documenting my work, keeping copies of my pieces in her personal files. The breaking point came during my senior year, just weeks before graduation. The stress, isolation, and constant psychological attacks had worn me down to nothing. After Tyler orchestrated a particularly cruel public humiliation at prom, where he had convinced several classmates to openly mock my scars and limp during the dance, I reached a place where I couldn't see any reason to continue fighting. I swallowed an entire bottle of my mother's prescription sleep aids, not necessarily wanting to die, but desperate to make the pain stop. Mrs. Chin found me unconscious in the art room the next morning, where I had gone to say goodbye to the one place that had ever felt safe. The hospital stay was brief, but it gave me time to think clearly for the first time in years. I realized that I couldn't win against Tyler using his methods, that I couldn't force my parents to love me the way they used to, and that my only path forward was to build a life independent of their approval. When I returned to school for the final weeks before graduation, I was different. The desperate, pleading girl who had been trying to earn back her family's love was gone. In her place was someone harder, more focused, and absolutely determined to succeed despite everyone who wanted to see her fail. Senior year was when Tyler's manipulation reached its peak, and when I finally began to understand the full scope of his systematic campaign against me. What I discovered during those final months at home would haunt me for years and fuel my determination to one day expose the truth about who my brother really was. Tyler's acceptance to Harvard University was announced at dinner on a Tuesday evening in March. My parents were ecstatic, talking about how their son's hard work and dedication had finally paid off. They opened a bottle of champagne they had been saving for a special occasion and toasted Tyler's bright future. I sat at that table, watching my brother smile modestly while accepting their praise, and something felt wrong. Tyler had never been particularly interested in the subjects he claimed to be passionate about in his application. His essays, which my parents read aloud with tears in their eyes, sounded nothing like Tyler's usual writing style. It took me 3 weeks to figure out what had happened, and the discovery was devastating. Tyler had stolen my junior year English essay about resilience and trauma, the one that had earned me recognition from the state writing competition. He had changed the names and some details, but the core ideas, the emotional depth, and even specific phrases were mine. He had submitted my work as his own college application essay, the piece that had apparently moved the admissions committee and helped secure his acceptance to one of the most prestigious universities in the world. When I confronted him with printed copies of both essays, highlighting the identical passages, Tyler didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he smiled with a coldness that still gives me chills and told me that no one would believe me anyway. He was right. When I brought the evidence to my parents, they accused me of copying Tyler's work and trying to take credit for his success. They said my jealousy had reached pathological levels and that I needed professional help to deal with my inability to accept my brother's accomplishments. That same week, my parents forgot my graduation. They were so focused on celebrating Tyler's Harvard acceptance and planning for his future that my high school graduation simply slipped their minds. I sat in the auditorium in my cap and gown, watching families cheer for their graduates, while my seat remained empty. Mrs. Chen noticed and came to sit with me during the ceremony, but the humiliation was complete. When I came home that evening with my diploma, my parents were planning Tyler's graduation party for the following year. The third major betrayal came when I discovered that my college fund, money that had been saved specifically for my education since I was born, had been quietly transferred to Tyler's account. My parents justified this by explaining that Tyler's needs were more immediate and expensive, given his acceptance to Harvard. They promised that there would be money for me to attend community college later, after Tyler's needs were met. When I protested, reminding them that I had been accepted to several prestigious art schools with partial scholarships, they dismissed my dreams as impractical and expensive. Tyler's theft wasn't limited to my essay and college fund. Over the summer, I discovered that he had been selling my artwork online for the past 2 years. He had photographed my pieces and was marketing them as his own original work on various platforms. He had made thousands of dollars from my creativity, money that he used to fund his social activities and build his reputation as a well-rounded, artistic young man. When I found the online accounts, I realized that some of my most personal pieces, created during my darkest moments, were being sold to strangers and described in Tyler's words as expressions of his own emotional journey. The scholarship interview that could have changed my life was sabotaged by an anonymous phone call to the admissions office. Someone claiming to be a concerned teacher reported that I had been caught plagiarizing and had a history of mental health issues that made me unsuitable for their program. The interview was canceled, the scholarship was withdrawn, and my last hope for escaping my situation through education was destroyed. I didn't learn about the phone call until years later, but I knew in my heart that Tyler was responsible. As graduation approached, my parents issued an ultimatum that would define the next phase of my life. They told me that I had 2 choices. I could apologize to Tyler for all my accusations and jealous behavior, commit to supporting his success unconditionally, and agree to therapy to address my mental health issues. Or I could leave their home and figure out my future on my own. They framed this as tough love, claiming that enabling my jealousy and vindictiveness wasn't helping anyone. I chose to leave, but I had nowhere to go. For weeks, I slept in the school art room, using the shower in the gym and eating from vending machines with money I earned from odd jobs. I was working at a local diner during the day, at a grocery store in the evenings, and doing freelance graphic design work whenever I could find it. Mrs. Chen discovered my living situation when she found me sleeping among the easels one morning, and she quietly began leaving food and supplies where I could find them. Miguel Rodriguez, the school janitor, became my second ally during this impossible time. Miguel had immigrated from Mexico with his family when he was young, and he understood what it meant to fight for survival in a world that seemed designed to keep you down. He began leaving me encouraging notes along with sandwiches his wife had made, and he never asked questions about why I was living at school. Miguel's kindness kept me going during those weeks when I felt completely alone in the world. The discovery that my own mother, Linda, had been actively working against me was perhaps the most crushing revelation of all. I overheard a phone conversation where she was telling Tyler's college counselor that I had a history of making false accusations and that any negative reports about Tyler should be disregarded because they were likely coming from his troubled sister. She had been preemptively protecting Tyler from any consequences of his behavior by destroying my credibility before I even had a chance to speak. By the end of summer, I had saved enough money to rent a tiny studio apartment across town. I was 18, legally an adult, but I felt ancient. I had been aged by betrayal, hardened by abandonment, and educated in ways that no teenager should have to learn. My family had taught me that love was conditional, that truth was relative, and that survival required constant vigilance against those who claimed to care about you. Tyler left for Harvard in the fall with great fanfare. My parents threw him a going-away party, invited the extended family, and spent the evening talking about how proud they were of their successful son. I wasn't invited, of course, but I watched from across the street as people I had once considered family celebrated the achievement that was partially built on stolen pieces of my life. That night, as I walked back to my empty apartment, I made a promise to myself. I would not just survive what my family had done to me, I would thrive in spite of it, and someday, the truth about Tyler Martinez would be impossible to ignore. The dinner scene that would haunt me for 12 years took place on Thanksgiving of my freshman year at community college. I had been attending classes while working multiple jobs, slowly building toward transferring to a 4-year school despite having no family support. Tyler was home from Harvard for the holiday, golden and glowing from his Ivy League experience, regaling my parents with stories of prestigious internships and influential connections. I had been invited to this dinner in what I thought was an olive branch. My mother, Linda, had called me the week before, saying that the family missed me and that holidays should be about forgiveness and coming together. Desperate for any sign that my parents might be ready to acknowledge what Tyler had done to me, I agreed to join them. I even brought a peace offering, a beautiful painting I had created of our family before everything fell apart, a piece that had taken me weeks to complete and represented my hope for reconciliation. The evening started normally enough. Tyler was charming and animated, telling stories about his classes and professors that made my parents laugh and beam with pride. I tried to contribute to the conversation, sharing that I was earning straight A's at community college and planning to transfer to a 4-year art program. But every time I spoke, Tyler would subtly redirect the conversation back to his experiences, his achievements, his bright future. The moment that would change everything happened during dessert. Tyler had been drinking wine throughout the evening, and his usual calculated cruelty was becoming more obvious. When I mentioned that I had been accepted into a competitive portfolio review program that could lead to a full scholarship, Tyler's mask finally slipped completely. "Rebecca," he said, his voice carrying that same cold amusement I had learned to fear, "when are you going to stop living in this fantasy world? Look at yourself. You're an ugly, disabled fool who couldn't even finish high school without having a nervous breakdown. Do you really think any legitimate school is going to want someone like you representing them?" The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to defend me, to tell Tyler that his words were cruel and unacceptable. Instead, I watched my mother nod slowly, as if Tyler had finally voiced something she had been thinking for years. "Tyler's right," Linda said, her voice steady and matter-of-fact. "Honey, we've been trying to be supportive, but your expectations are unrealistic. You need to accept your limitations and find a more suitable path. Maybe a trade school or a simple job where your appearance won't be an issue." My father, James, looked uncomfortable but didn't contradict her. "We just want what's best for you," he said quietly. Sometimes love means helping someone see reality clearly. The fourth major betrayal was my mother's revelation that followed. As I sat there, tears streaming down my face, Linda continued speaking with a clinical detachment that was more devastating than Tyler's open cruelty. "If I'm being completely honest," she said, cutting into her pie with steady hands, "I've regretted fighting so hard to save you after the accident. The medical bills nearly bankrupted us, and for what? So you could spend the rest of your life being bitter and resentful? I look at you now, and I don't see my daughter anymore. I see an angry, damaged person who blames everyone else for her problems. Sometimes I wonder if it would have been kinder to everyone if we hadn't fought so hard to keep you alive." Tyler smiled at this confession, as if his manipulation had finally achieved its ultimate goal. He raised his wine glass in a mock toast. "To facing reality," he said. "To understanding where we all stand in this family." The final devastating blow came when Tyler revealed his masterpiece of manipulation. He told my parents that I had been stalking him at college, that I had made threats against his professors, and that the Harvard security office had suggested he file a restraining order against me. None of this was true, but Tyler had prepared well. He showed them fabricated emails supposedly from Harvard staff, fake police reports, and even a letter from a psychiatric professional recommending that I be kept away from him for everyone's safety. My parents' reaction was swift and final. James told me that I was no longer welcome in their home, that my presence was clearly harmful to the family's peace and Tyler's success. Linda added that they would be changing their phone numbers and that any attempt to contact them would be considered harassment. They had decided to legally disown me, to cut all ties completely, because they couldn't risk Tyler's bright future being damaged by my instability. When I tried to speak, to defend myself or explain that Tyler was lying, they wouldn't listen. Tyler had spent years building his case, creating a narrative where I was the disturbed, jealous sister whose mental illness made her dangerous to be around. Every instance of my resistance to his cruelty had been reframed as evidence of my instability. Every achievement I had earned despite their neglect had been dismissed as delusion or fraud. I was escorted to the door like a stranger, like someone who had never lived in that house, never been loved by those people, never been part of that family. Tyler followed me outside and, when we were away from our parents' hearing, delivered his final victory speech. "You never understood the game we were playing," he said, his voice calm and satisfied. "From the moment you got those scars, you became a liability to this family. I just helped everyone see what was already true. You don't belong with us. You never will. And now it's official." That night, I was completely alone in the world. My belongings had been packed and left on the front porch like garbage. The keys to their house no longer worked for me. My phone was filled with blocked numbers. I had been erased from the Martinez family as completely as if I had never existed. I spent that night in my car in a 24-hour diner parking lot, crying until I had no tears left, and then sitting in the silence that followed. The girl who had once been loved unconditionally by James and Linda Martinez was gone. The sister who had protected Tyler, helped him with homework, and shared childhood dreams with him was dead. In her place was someone harder, someone who understood that survival meant depending only on yourself. But even in that darkness, something was being born. The pain was transforming into determination. The humiliation was crystallizing into resolve. They had taken everything from me, but they had also freed me from any obligation to protect them from the consequences of their choices. Tyler had won this battle, but he had no idea that in destroying the loving, trusting girl I used to be, he had created someone who would never stop fighting back. The years that followed my family's disownment were the hardest and most transformative of my life. At 18, I was completely on my own with nothing but a fierce determination to prove that Tyler's assessment of me was wrong. I transferred from community college to the Art Institute of Chicago on a partial scholarship I earned through portfolio competition, but paying for the remaining costs required working 3 jobs while maintaining a perfect GPA. My days began at 4 in the morning with a shift at a downtown bakery, where I decorated cakes and learned about running a small business from the owner, Maria Santos. She was an immigrant who had built her successful shop from nothing, and she taught me that resilience was not just about surviving hardship, but about transforming it into strength. After classes, I worked at a graphic design firm doing data entry and basic design tasks, and my evenings were spent waitressing at an upscale restaurant where I studied the dynamics of successful people and learned to carry myself with confidence despite my scars. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, but education was a necessity I refused to compromise on. I threw myself into my studies with an intensity that worried my professors, but also impressed them. My artwork during this period was dark and powerful, drawn from reserves of pain I was still processing. Professor Williams, who taught advanced painting techniques, began featuring my work in student exhibitions and connecting me with gallery owners who were interested in my unique perspective. The healing process was slow and complicated. I started therapy with Dr. Sarah Michelle Rodriguez, a psychologist who specialized in family trauma and narcissistic abuse. Dr. Rodriguez helped me understand that Tyler's behavior fit the pattern of a narcissistic personality disorder, and that my parents had become enablers in a system designed to sacrifice one child for the benefit of another. Learning that there were names for what I had experienced, that other families had similar dynamics, helped me realize that I wasn't crazy or fundamentally flawed. Building a chosen family was terrifying at first. Jennifer Walsh, my roommate in the tiny apartment we shared near campus, became the sister I had always wished Tyler could be. Jennifer was studying business and came from a loving, supportive family who welcomed me into their holiday celebrations when they learned I had nowhere to go. Her parents, Robert and Patricia Walsh, treated me with the unconditional kindness I had forgotten was possible, and slowly I began to remember what healthy family relationships looked like. My first romantic relationship was with David Chin, a fellow art student who saw my scars as part of my story rather than flaws to overlook. David was patient with my trust issues, understanding about my work schedule, and supportive of my ambitious goals. Through David, I learned that love didn't have to come with conditions or manipulation, that healthy relationships involved mutual support rather than competition. Although our relationship eventually ended when David moved to California for a graduate program, he taught me that I was capable of being loved for who I was, scars and all. Starting my freelance design business from our dorm room was born out of necessity, but grew into passion. I began by creating logos and marketing materials for local businesses, working late into the night after my other jobs to build a portfolio and reputation. My artistic background gave me an edge in understanding visual communication, and my experience with hardship made me incredibly reliable and hardworking. Within 2 years, I had a steady stream of clients and was able to quit one of my part-time jobs. Tyler's harassment didn't end just because our parents had disowned me. He seemed to view my success as a personal threat and began a campaign of professional sabotage that would continue for years. He contacted my employers with false reports about my mental health, claiming to be a concerned brother trying to protect them from hiring someone unstable. He created fake online reviews for my freelance business, posted defamatory content about me on professional networking sites, and even showed up at my college once, telling administrators that I was dangerous and shouldn't be around other students. Each attack from Tyler strengthened my resolve rather than breaking it. I documented everything, saved every email and message, and built a comprehensive record of his harassment. I learned about legal protections for victims of stalking and harassment, and I began working with a lawyer who specialized in family abuse cases. The legal fees were expensive, but I was determined to protect myself and the life I was building. My parents made their final attempt at reconciliation during my junior year, when Tyler's life began showing cracks. He had been placed on academic probation at Harvard for plagiarism, his drinking had become problematic, and his girlfriend had broken up with him after discovering his pattern of manipulation and lying. Suddenly, Linda and James wanted to reconnect with their daughter, calling me with tearful apologies and explanations that they had been misguided, but always loved me. I refused their overtures completely. The people who could disown their child on Thanksgiving dinner would not be allowed back into my life during their moments of convenience. I had learned that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation, that I could heal from their betrayal without giving them access to hurt me again. Their attempts to contact me only reinforced my conviction that I had made the right choice in building a life independent of their approval. Graduating with highest honors from the Art Institute was a triumph that belonged entirely to me. Jennifer's family attended my graduation, cheering loudly when my name was called for academic achievement awards. Professor Williams gave a speech about my resilience and artistic vision that brought tears to my eyes. The job offer from Hartman Creative, one of Chicago's most prestigious marketing firms, came the week after graduation, and I accepted it with the knowledge that I had earned everything through my own effort and talent. The restraining order I filed against Tyler during my senior year was the final step in legally protecting myself from his continued harassment. The evidence I had collected over the years painted a clear picture of systematic stalking and defamation, and the judge granted a comprehensive order that prohibited Tyler from contacting me, my employers, or anyone in my professional network. For the first time since leaving my family home, I felt legally protected from Tyler's interference in my life. At 22, I was a college graduate with a job at a respected firm, an apartment I could afford on my own, and a support system of people who genuinely cared about my well-being. The scared, broken 18-year-old who had been thrown away by her family was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and refused to accept less than she deserved. I had survived the worst that Tyler and my parents could do to me, and I had built something beautiful from the wreckage they had left behind. My career at Hartman Creative began with the kind of rapid advancement that surprised even me. Within 6 months, I had been promoted from junior designer to senior creative associate, and my campaigns were winning industry awards. My background in fine arts gave me a unique perspective on visual storytelling that clients loved, and my experience with hardship made me incredibly motivated to succeed. But Tyler wasn't finished trying to destroy what I had built. The fifth major betrayal came during my second year at Hartman Creative, when I was leading a major campaign for a national retailer. I had spent months developing a comprehensive marketing strategy that combined traditional advertising with innovative social media engagement and community outreach. The campaign was groundbreaking in its approach to authentic storytelling, and early test markets showed exceptional results. I was scheduled to present the full campaign to the client's executive board, a presentation that would likely lead to my promotion to creative director. 2 days before the presentation, I discovered that Tyler had somehow obtained copies of my entire campaign strategy and had presented it as his own work to a competing firm. He was working as an account manager at a smaller agency, having failed to maintain his position at the prestigious company that had initially hired him out of Harvard. Tyler's version of my campaign was simplified and less sophisticated, but it contained enough of my core ideas to be recognizable as stolen intellectual property. When the competing firm presented their proposal to the client just hours before my scheduled presentation, I watched years of my work being credited to Rebecca Martinez and his team. The client loved the campaign, but was confused about why 2 different agencies were presenting nearly identical strategies. Tyler had positioned himself as the primary creative mind behind the concept, and his agency's lower fees made their proposal attractive despite the inferior execution. My response to this theft was strategic rather than emotional. I had learned from my teenage experiences that direct confrontation with Tyler rarely succeeded, so instead I focused on building an unshakable case for my ownership of the work. I had detailed records of my creative process, documented meetings with colleagues about strategy development, and preliminary designs that predated Tyler's presentation by months. More importantly, I had witnesses at Hartman Creative who could testify to my role in developing the campaign. The legal battle that followed was expensive and exhausting, but it established important precedents for protecting creative intellectual property. My lawyer was able to prove that Tyler had gained access to my work through illegal means, likely by hacking my computer or bribing someone with access to our internal systems. The competing firm was forced to withdraw their proposal, Tyler was terminated from his position, and I was awarded damages for the theft of my intellectual property. This victory marked a turning point in how I dealt with Tyler's ongoing harassment. Instead of trying to avoid or minimize his attacks, I began actively documenting them and building legal cases against his behavior. Each instance of sabotage became evidence in a growing file that would eventually be used to protect not just me, but other people Tyler targeted in the future. My parents' desperation became evident as Tyler's life continued to deteriorate. His termination from the marketing firm was followed by failed attempts to start his own business, a series of toxic relationships that ended badly, and growing problems with alcohol and gambling. Linda began calling my workplace, not to reconnect with me, but to ask if I could help Tyler get a job at Hartman Creative. The irony was stunning, that the family who had branded me a failure now wanted to use my success to rescue their golden child. My romantic relationship with Alexander Brooks began during this period of professional triumph and family chaos. Alexander was a senior account executive at a partner firm, someone whose reputation for integrity and kindness was well known throughout Chicago's marketing community. Unlike David, who had been sweet but uncertain about his future, Alexander was established in his career and clear about his values. He was also the first person I dated who had dealt with family estrangement himself, having cut ties with abusive parents several years earlier. Alexander's support was different from anything I had experienced before. He didn't try to fix my family situation or convince me that forgiveness was always the right path. Instead, he helped me build systems to protect my professional reputation and personal well-being from Tyler's continued attacks. Alexander introduced me to other successful professionals who had overcome family abuse, and through these connections I began to understand that my story was part of a larger pattern of resilience and recovery. Building my professional network became a form of protection as well as advancement. I cultivated relationships with people throughout the industry who could vouch for my character and work ethic. When Tyler attempted to spread lies about my mental health or professional competence, these allies would immediately contradict his claims and warn others about his behavior. The network effect meant that Tyler's ability to damage my reputation diminished significantly as my professional standing increased. My promotion to creative director at Hartman Creative came with recognition as one of Chicago's rising stars in marketing and advertising. Industry publications featured my work, I was invited to speak at conferences, and clients specifically requested my involvement in their projects. This visibility made Tyler's attacks more difficult and more likely to backfire because too many people knew my work and character for his lies to be credible. The therapy I continued throughout this period helped me understand that Tyler's escalating desperation was actually a sign of my success. Dr. Rodriguez explained that narcissistic abusers often become more aggressive when their victims escape and thrive, because the victim's success threatens the abuser's narrative about their own superiority. Tyler's increasing instability wasn't random, it was a predictable response to my refusal to remain in the victim role he had created for me. Financial success enabled me to make choices about my appearance and healing that had previously been impossible. I consulted with plastic surgeons about reducing my facial scarring, not because I was ashamed of my appearance, but because I wanted to reclaim agency over my own body. Ultimately, I decided against the surgery, realizing that my scars had become part of my strength rather than evidence of my damage. They were proof that I had survived, that I had saved someone's life, and that I had rebuilt myself despite everyone who tried to break me. Tyler's announcement of his engagement to Sarah Thompson reached me through social media, where wedding photos showed my former best friend smiling beside my brother in what appeared to be a perfect romantic moment. But I had learned to look beyond surface appearances, and something about Sarah's smile seemed forced. When she sent me a private message asking if we could talk, I agreed to meet her, curious about what Tyler's latest victim might need to tell me. The wedding invitation that arrived 6 months later was Tyler's final attempt at psychological manipulation, his way of forcing me to witness his apparent happiness and success. But Tyler had miscalculated. The broken, desperate girl he remembered no longer existed. In her place was a woman who understood power, who had built her own success, and who was finally ready to confront the family that had tried to destroy her. The invitation wasn't just a wedding announcement, it was an opportunity for justice that I had been preparing for without even realizing it. The decision to attend Tyler's wedding wasn't made impulsively. As I held that elegant invitation in my hands, I realized this was the opportunity one had been unconsciously preparing for during 12 years of rebuilding my life. Tyler had invited me to witness what he believed was his ultimate triumph, but he had no idea that I had spent over a decade documenting his crimes and building resources that could finally expose the truth about who he really was. My first call was to Harrison Mitchell, an investigative journalist I had met at a professional networking event 6 months earlier. Harrison specialized in exposing academic fraud and had been quietly tracking a pattern of plagiarism and theft that extended from prestigious universities down through various industries. When I told him about Tyler's history of stealing my work, starting with the Harvard application essay, Harrison's interest was immediately piqued. It turned out that Tyler Martinez was already on Harrison's radar for several suspicious academic achievements and professional accomplishments that seemed inconsistent with his demonstrated abilities. Working with Harrison to gather evidence was like assembling a complex puzzle that had been scattered across 12 years of my life. We started with the college application essay theft, using my original handwritten drafts and the timestamped digital files to prove that Tyler's Harvard application contained stolen material. Harrison had contacts within the university who were willing to investigate academic fraud cases, even years after the fact, if the evidence was compelling enough. The evidence of Tyler's financial crimes was more recent and potentially more serious. Harrison's investigation revealed that Tyler had been embezzling money from his last 3 employers through a sophisticated scheme involving fake vendor accounts and inflated expenses. He had also been filing fraudulent tax returns, claiming deductions for business expenses and charitable donations that didn't exist. The amounts involved were substantial enough to warrant federal investigation, and Harrison had already been in touch with authorities about the pattern he was uncovering. Alexander's support during this period was invaluable, not just emotionally, but practically. His connections in the legal and business community helped us ensure that our investigation was thorough and properly documented. Alexander also served as a voice of caution, reminding me that my goal should be justice rather than revenge, and that I needed to protect myself legally throughout the process of exposing Tyler's crimes. The most unexpected development came when Sarah Thompson reached out to me directly 3 weeks before the wedding. Sarah was no longer the confident, popular girl I remembered from high school. When we met at a quiet coffee shop downtown, I was shocked by how diminished she seemed, how carefully she moved, how she flinched when her phone buzzed. Sarah had become Tyler's victim in ways that were frighteningly familiar. Sarah's story was devastating and illuminating. Tyler had systematically isolated her from friends and family, convinced her that she was lucky to be with someone of his caliber, and created a pattern of emotional and financial abuse that had escalated to physical violence in recent months. Sarah showed me photographs of bruises on her arms and ribs, documentation she had been secretly keeping because some part of her understood that she might need evidence someday. "I know you have no reason to help me," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I was terrible to you in high school, that I believed his lies about you being unstable. But Rebecca, I think he's going to kill me if I don't find a way out. And I think the wedding is some kind of trap, like he's planning something that will make it impossible for me to leave." Sarah's plea forced me to confront my own motivations for attending the wedding. Was I seeking justice for the crimes Tyler had committed, or was I trying to get revenge for the pain he had caused me? Sarah's situation made it clear that Tyler's pattern of abuse extended far beyond what he had done to me, and that exposing him might protect not just my own reputation, but future victims as well. My internal struggle intensified as the wedding approached. Dr. Rodriguez and I spent several sessions exploring my feelings about confrontation, justice, and healing. She warned me that attending the wedding could be re-traumatizing, that seeing my parents again might bring up unresolved grief and anger that could affect my mental health. But she also acknowledged that sometimes confronting abusers, when done safely and strategically, could be an important part of recovery. The preparation for the wedding confrontation was meticulous. Harrison and I compiled a comprehensive dossier of Tyler's crimes, including the academic fraud, workplace theft, tax evasion, and domestic violence. We prepared copies of all documentation and ensured that law enforcement was ready to act on the evidence we would present. Alexander arranged for security backup, knowing that Tyler's response to exposure might be unpredictable and potentially violent. My final therapy session before the wedding focused on setting realistic expectations for what the confrontation might achieve. Dr. Rodriguez reminded me that my parents' reaction might be disappointing, that they might continue to protect Tyler even when faced with undeniable evidence of his crimes. She helped me prepare for the possibility that the confrontation might not bring the closure or vindication I was hoping for, and that my healing was not dependent on their acknowledgement of the truth. The decision about whether to warn Tyler in advance was difficult. Part of me wanted the satisfaction of seeing his shock when the truth was revealed publicly, but Harrison argued that giving Tyler advance notice might allow him to flee or destroy evidence. In the end, we decided that the wedding itself would be the first moment Tyler learned that his crimes were being exposed, maximizing the likelihood that justice would finally be served. As I prepared for the wedding, I realized that the scared, broken girl who had been thrown out of her family home 12 years ago was gone forever. In her place was a woman who understood power, who had built her own success, and who was finally ready to demand accountability from the people who had tried to destroy her. The wedding wouldn't just be Tyler's celebration, it would be my declaration that the victim he had created no longer existed. The morning of Tyler's wedding dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed designed for celebration. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy blue dress that was elegant but not attention-seeking, and took time with my makeup to ensure that my scars were visible but well-presented. I wanted to look like the successful professional I had become, not the broken teenager my family remembered. Alexander picked me up at precisely 10 o'clock, and as we drove toward the venue, I felt a strange calm settling over me. The wedding was being held at the Riverside Country Club, an expensive venue that my parents could barely afford, but had chosen to impress Tyler's Harvard connections and Sarah's prominent family. As we pulled into the circular driveway, I saw several people I recognized from my childhood, family members and old neighbors who had known me before the fire. Their double takes when they recognized me were satisfying in a way I hadn't expected, proof that the timid, scarred girl they remembered had transformed into someone worth noticing. My parents' shock when they saw me was immediate and profound. Linda dropped her champagne glass on the marble steps of the clubhouse, and James actually stumbled backward, as if he had seen a ghost. They had aged more than 12 years should account for, and I realized that their golden child's failures had taken a toll on them that my absence hadn't. Linda's hair was completely gray now, and James had the hollow look of someone who had discovered that his investments had failed to pay off. "Rebecca," Linda whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here? How did you? We thought you were." "You thought I was what, Mother?" I asked, my voice steady and clear. "Dead? Homeless? Destroyed by the lies you chose to believe." The desperate attempt at reconciliation that followed was as pathetic as it was predictable. Linda began crying, reaching for me with shaking hands while James stood behind her nodding frantically. They had always loved me, they claimed. They had made terrible mistakes, but they were older and wiser now. They knew Tyler had problems, they said, and they regretted choosing him over me. They wanted their daughter back. They wanted to be a family again. "You have one child," I replied calmly. "You made that choice 12 years ago at Thanksgiving dinner. You disowned me legally and emotionally because Tyler convinced you I was unstable and dangerous. You chose to believe his lies instead of investigating the truth. That choice has consequences that don't disappear just because Tyler's life isn't working out the way you planned." Tyler's arrival at the country club was dramatic in all the wrong ways. He was clearly intoxicated despite the early hour, his face flushed red and his movements unsteady. When he saw me standing with our parents, his expression shifted through surprise, rage, and what looked like genuine fear. He approached our group with the aggressive swagger I remembered from our teenage years, but there was something desperate underlying his bravado now. "What the hell is she doing here?" Tyler demanded, his voice loud enough to draw attention from other guests. "I specifically said she wasn't welcome. She's probably here to cause trouble, to ruin my wedding because she can't stand seeing me happy." The wedding guests were beginning to notice the commotion, and Sarah appeared at Tyler's side looking absolutely terrified. She was pale and thin, her wedding dress hanging loosely on what had clearly been a much healthier frame just months earlier. When she met my eyes, I saw gratitude mixed with desperation, and I knew she was counting on me to follow through on the promise I had made to help her escape. Tyler's public meltdown began when I calmly refused to leave. He started shouting about restraining orders and calling security, making threats about having me arrested for trespassing. His behavior was so erratic and aggressive that other guests started backing away, and I could see his new in-laws looking deeply concerned about their daughter's choice in husbands. Tyler was destroying his own wedding without any help from me, simply by revealing his true nature under stress. The moment of truth came when Harrison Mitchell appeared with 2 police officers and a briefcase full of evidence. Tyler's face went completely white when Harrison introduced himself as an investigative journalist and informed everyone present that Tyler Martinez was under investigation for multiple felonies, including academic fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, and domestic violence. The Illinois Attorney General's office has issued warrants for your arrest, Officer Patricia Williams announced, producing handcuffs while her partner read Tyler his rights. Tyler Martinez, you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and filing false tax returns. The wedding guests watched in stunned silence as the groom was handcuffed during his own ceremony. Sarah broke free from her frozen shock and began removing her engagement ring, her wedding dress, and Tyler's control over her life. She announced to the gathered crowd that she was pressing domestic violence charges and would be cooperating fully with the investigation into Tyler's crimes. My parents' reaction was everything Dr. Rodriguez had prepared me for and worse. Even faced with overwhelming evidence of Tyler's crimes, even watching him being arrested at his own wedding, they continued to protect him. Linda screamed that this was all my fault, that I had orchestrated Tyler's downfall out of jealousy and spite. James accused me of destroying the family out of revenge for childhood grievances that I should have outgrown. You've always been jealous of Tyler's success, Linda shrieked, her composure completely shattered. You couldn't stand that he was the smart one, the accomplished one, the one with a future. So you've spent 12 years plotting to destroy him, and now you've gotten your revenge. Are you happy now? Are you satisfied that you've ruined everything? The irony was stunning. After 12 years of evidence that Tyler was a fraud, a thief, and an abuser, my parents were still choosing him over truth, still blaming me for consequences that Tyler had created through his own actions. Their response confirmed everything Dr. Rodriguez had told me about families that sacrifice one child to protect another, and it freed me from any lingering hope that they might someday acknowledge what they had done to me. Tyler's final desperate attempt came as the police were leading him away. He broke free from their grip for just a moment and lunged toward me, screaming obscenities and threats while wedding guests scrambled to get out of his way. Alexander and Officer Williams subdued him quickly, but not before everyone present had seen the violent rage that Tyler had hidden behind his charming facade for so many years. As the police car drove away with Tyler in the back seat, I felt a profound sense of completion. The scared 13-year-old girl who had been systematically destroyed by her own family had finally been vindicated. The truth about Tyler Martinez was now public record, and justice was finally being served. But more importantly, I realized that my healing had never been dependent on this moment, that I had already reclaimed my life and my worth through 12 years of hard work and determination. The aftermath of Tyler's arrest was swift and comprehensive. The investigation that Harrison Mitchell had been building revealed a pattern of fraud and abuse that extended far beyond what even I had known. Tyler was eventually convicted on 17 different charges, including academic fraud at Harvard University, embezzlement from 4 different employers, tax evasion spanning 7 years, domestic violence against 3 different women, including Sarah, and stalking charges related to his harassment of me throughout my college and professional years. Harvard University revoked Tyler's degree when the full extent of his academic fraud was revealed. The essay that had secured his admission was just the beginning. Investigators found that Tyler had cheated or plagiarized his way through almost every class, using a combination of purchased papers, stolen work from other students, and assignments that had been completed by people he hired. His entire Ivy League education was revealed to be as fraudulent as everything else about his carefully constructed image. My parents' response to Tyler's conviction was exactly what Dr. Rodriguez had predicted. Even faced with overwhelming evidence and legal judgment, Linda and James continued to view Tyler as the victim of circumstances beyond his control. They spent their retirement savings on legal fees for his defense, mortgaged their house to pay for appeals that had no chance of success, and refused to acknowledge that Tyler's crimes were the result of his own choices rather than external pressures. Their final attempt at reconciliation with me came during Tyler's sentencing hearing. Linda approached me in the courthouse hallway with tears streaming down her face, begging me to speak on Tyler's behalf, to ask for leniency from the judge. She claimed that our family could heal if we all came together to support Tyler during his time of need, that forgiveness and love could overcome the mistakes that had been made. I declined with the same calm dignity I had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. Tyler is receiving exactly the consequences he earned through his own actions, I told her. I won't help him escape accountability for the crimes he committed against me, against Sarah, against his employers, and against everyone else he deceived. And I won't pretend that 12 years of systematic abuse and theft can be forgiven just because he's finally facing justice. That courthouse conversation was the last time I spoke to Linda or James Martinez. They had made their choice to stand by Tyler despite overwhelming evidence of his guilt, and I had made my choice to prioritize my own healing and safety over their delusions. Dr. Rodriguez helped me process the grief of losing my parents again, but this time the loss felt clean and final rather than devastating and confusing. Sarah Thompson's recovery became one of the most rewarding aspects of the entire experience. Freed from Tyler's manipulation and abuse, Sarah began therapy to address the trauma she had experienced and to understand how she had been targeted and controlled. Our friendship was rebuilt slowly and carefully, based on mutual healing rather than shared history. Sarah became an advocate for domestic violence survivors and eventually started a nonprofit organization that helped other women escape abusive relationships. The professional recognition that followed the exposure of Tyler's crimes was gratifying, but not surprising. Industry publications wrote articles about my resilience and success despite family sabotage. I was invited to speak at conferences about overcoming workplace harassment and building professional networks that protect against abuse. The visibility that came from these speaking engagements led to new opportunities and consulting work that expanded my career in directions I had never imagined. Alexander's proposal came 6 months after Tyler's conviction, during a quiet dinner at the restaurant where we had our first date. He had waited until the legal proceedings were complete and my family situation was fully resolved before asking me to marry him. Alexander understood that I needed to reclaim my own identity completely before I could commit to building a shared life with someone else. His patience and respect for my healing process was evidence of the healthy love I had learned to recognize and accept. Our wedding was everything Tyler's had pretended to be. A celebration of authentic love surrounded by people who genuinely cared about our happiness. Jennifer Walsh was my maid of honor. Mrs. Chin and Miguel Rodriguez sat in the front row representing the teachers and mentors who had believed in me. And colleagues from Hartman Creative filled the ceremony with professional family who had supported my career growth. Harrison Mitchell attended as the friend who had helped me achieve justice, and Sarah Thompson was there as proof that healing and forgiveness were possible when they were earned rather than demanded. The decision about my scars remained mine to make, and I chose to keep them exactly as they were. During our engagement photo shoot, Alexander suggested that we make sure the scars were visible in our formal portraits, not because we wanted to highlight my trauma, but because they were part of the story of who I had become. The scars represented not just the fire that had changed my life, but the strength I had developed through surviving everything that followed. Starting the Rebecca Martinez Foundation for Young Survivors was my way of ensuring that other children facing family abuse and sabotage would have resources and support that I had lacked. The foundation provides scholarships for students who have been educationally sabotaged by family members, legal assistance for young people seeking emancipation from abusive homes, and counseling services specifically designed for survivors of sibling abuse and parental neglect. The foundation's motto, borrowed from my own experience, is Chosen Family, Earned Success, Authentic Healing. My art exhibition opening, titled Resilience, A Journey from Victim to Survivor to Thriver, drew crowds that filled the gallery and spilled onto the sidewalk. The paintings chronicled my journey from the scared 13-year-old who had been systematically destroyed by her family to the confident professional who had built a life based on her own values and achievements. Mrs. Chin, now retired but still vibrant, stood beside me during the opening reception and told everyone who would listen that she had always known I would accomplish extraordinary things. The final piece in the exhibition was a self-portrait painted 12 years after my family's disownment. In it, I am wearing a navy blue dress similar to the one I wore to Tyler's wedding, but I am surrounded by the people who had chosen to love and support me. Alexander stands beside me with his hand on my shoulder. Jennifer, Sarah, Mrs. Chin, Miguel, and Harrison are arranged around us like the family we had created through mutual respect and genuine care. My scars are clearly visible, but they are rendered in gold paint, transformed from wounds into symbols of strength and survival. Looking back on the 12 years between my family's rejection and Tyler's conviction, I understand that the greatest victory was not seeing him arrested or vindicated in court. The greatest victory was becoming someone who didn't need their approval to know my own worth, someone who could build meaningful relationships based on mutual respect rather than desperate need for acceptance. Tyler had tried to destroy me, but in doing so he had freed me from the obligation to remain small and damaged to make other people comfortable. The life I built after losing everything my family had given me was more authentic, more fulfilling, and more successful than anything I could have achieved if I had remained trapped in their dysfunction. I learned that family is not defined by blood but by choice, that success is not measured by other people's approval but by your own sense of accomplishment, and that healing is possible even from the most devastating betrayals when you refuse to let other people's actions define your worth. As I stood in that gallery surrounded by people who genuinely loved and supported me, I realized that Tyler had been wrong about everything. I was not ugly, disabled, or foolish. I was strong, accomplished, and wise enough to know the difference between love and manipulation, between family and DNA, between justice and revenge. The scared girl who had once begged for crumbs of affection from people who were incapable of love was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you build with yourself. What do you think you would have done in my situation? Would you have attended the wedding, or would you have let Tyler face the consequences of his actions without confronting your family directly? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about resilience, justice, and the power of chosen family. Share this with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible, that success is achievable even after devastating betrayal, and that you don't have to remain loyal to people who choose to harm you. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth is not determined by other people's ability to recognize it. You deserve love, respect, and success, regardless of what anyone else has told you about your value.